goodness. So today we're just going to cover some common 3D animation camera movements in Unreal, specifically because in the latest motion design update, which is 5.4, they've added some really good keyframe easing presets. So I just want to show you how that works and how you can also like fine tune it to your own liking. We'll also cover a few other techniques, so let's get started. Okay, so I'm in this existing scene from an upcoming tutorial collab for Ross Mason's Patreon. If any of you do any product render stuff in Cinema 4D and Redshift, I'm sure you already know about him. He makes great tutorials. Me and him are collabing on this scene for his Patreon, so we're kind of combining a Cinema 4D and Unreal Engine workflow, which will be coming very soon, I think in a week. Anyway, I'll be letting you guys know on my newsletter when that is officially released, but I thought I should cover a few fun animation techniques. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is I'm just gonna go into my 2-pane view, and if you wanna have the same setup, just go into this top left menu, go to layouts and select 2 panes. The next thing I'm gonna do is just make a fresh sequence. Right click, cinematics, level sequence. I'm gonna call this LS motion tutorial, and then S1 for shot 1. Cool, so I've just docked my sequencer in the bottom window here. Now I'm gonna show you 2 methods of how to achieve this. I actually prefer the second method, but it really is personal preference. I'm just gonna go up to the plus menu, cinematic, and then grab a cine camera actor, and then I'm just going to pilot the camera here. Cine camera actor. I'm just going to rename it cam_S1 and drag it into my sequence so that I know which file it's corresponding to, and then just move it around here. I'm going to set my aspect ratio to 0.8. I have a bunch of favorites selected here, and this is kind of an Instagram aspect ratio, and I'm going to set the focal length to 50. And the reason I don't have any depth of field happening here is because I've disabled it, because in any of these shots I don't really want any depth of field, so I just entered the console command depth of field quality space 0. By default it'll be on 4, I think. Yeah, so I've just put mine to 0. So you might notice in my outliner I have this little actor placed called target_lid, because we will be using that as our look at or our focal point of our camera. And all I've done, if you want to do the same thing, is go to the plus menu, grab a basic actor, and then just drag it into the scene, and then place it wherever you want your camera to be focused on. And then I've just renamed mine target_lid, and then I also have one for the text on the top. Next thing I'm going to do is go to my camera, scroll down to look at settings, and I'll just enable it, and then I'll search for my target. There we go, target lid. And now our camera, if I move it around, always faces our target lid. So that is how we'll get that sweeping motion. I'm just going to turn on my grid and just make sure that the target is really in the center. So somewhere there should be good. Okay, so now let's think of how and where we want our camera to start. I'm just going to, if you see me changing the pivot orientation, that is just this button here, and I'm just using the shortcut Control-tilde. I use this all the time, especially for this kind of work where you want to maybe stay in the same plane. I'm probably going to start somewhere here, maybe a little higher, and then drag it in a bit. And I'm just going to add a transform keyframe, drag this up. We'll start here. And of course, one thing I just realized, I do have my motion design enabled, I just have not started it. So press the start. Boom. And now I'm just going to go back to selection mode, just to make sure I'm in my cinematic viewport here, and then my default viewport here. Okay, so now I'm in the motion design sequencer. Just make sure you press the start button so that you have your motion design mode on. And what that'll do is give you a bunch of keyframe options here on the right, which you don't get in the default sequencer. I hope they add that soon, by the way. I don't know why it's not there. We're on 30 frames per second, so I reckon maybe 1.5 seconds in, I want the camera, I'm just gonna move it here, maybe there and up, should be good. And then press the plus button for another keyframe. So something like that. Yep, 3 seconds is a little too much. So maybe at frame 75, because I want it to sweep out quickly, I'm going to then move my camera to this side, drag it down a little bit, maybe a little further out, and then put another keyframe there. And then I'm just gonna hit save. So we now kind of have this easing in and out, but we don't have that nice kind of snappy, quick motion that we need for those sort of speed ramp type of cuts or velocity cuts. So the great thing about this new motion design update is if we select our keyframes here, we have all these presets on the right for easing in and out, which is super useful. If you've ever used the Grayscale Gorilla plugin for Cinema, they have all these kind of helpers in Cinema 4D as well. So the one we want is one of these ease in and outs. So if you hover over, it'll show you a preview of what the motion will look like. And let's just try exponential. So I'm just going to select that, and you'll see they'll go green. And then I'm also just going to go to my last keyframe and use the right square bracket, and I'm in loop mode, so I just want to see what this looks like. So sweep up and then down. I kind of want to edit this a little bit. So again, you can also try all the other presets that you'd like. I'm going to first like our first keyframe, and you can kind of see what's happening. It starts off slow, ramps up super fast, and then eases out. What I don't really like about this is how we go completely static in the middle. I kind of want it to maybe just slow down a little bit, but not come to a complete flat stop. So what I'm going to do is select my first keyframe, and instead of it being completely flat at the top, I'm just going to maybe drag it down a little bit, and then I'm going to select my middle keyframe, and this is where it's starting here. So then drag this up a little bit. So you can imagine how these two keyframes are kind of meeting each other. Now, if I play, it doesn't stop for as long, but it's still a little too much. Boom, boom. Okay, so I might bring this up a tad more, like that. And then let me bring this guy down a little more as well. Yeah, there we go. Now you see we're not coming to a complete halt. And if you kind of look at the can, I'm like looking at this top part here, this line, it's always moving. Even it never comes to a complete stop, which I really like. So we're always slowly rotating around. And that's kind of it for like the first cut. It's super simple, really easy to do. And I really like this sort of keyframe helper that we have here on the right. So if we select this guy, you can see the adjustments we made, and then this guy, you can see the adjustments we made. Just a friendly like and subscribe reminder. If you do override these keyframes, you will need to apply the preset again, because it can get a little glitchy with like the new values. So just remember, if you do change the timing or the values of any of these keyframes, you will need to adjust the curves again. So for the second method that we'll be using, it is going to be with the Cine camera rig rail, this guy here. So this is from the plugin that we enabled. The engine comes with this regular camera rig rail on by default. It just has a lot less options, so I prefer using the cinema camera rig rail. So I'm just going to click and drag that into the scene. And I'm also going to drag in a new camera. I'm going to rename the camera Cam S1B because it'll be an alternative version. I'm also just going to duplicate the previous sequence that we made, so Control D to duplicate, and then I'm just going to rename it S1B, go into it, and then just delete the old track. And then I'm just going to drag in our new camera and then bind it to the camera cut. Cool. So I'm going to pilot the S1B camera on the left viewport, and then I'm going to drag that camera on top of our rig rail and then zero out the location. And now if I drag our rig rail up, you can see that is what controls our camera. I'm also going to hide the rail visualization, and I'm also going to turn off the attachment for the camera so that it doesn't do any weird focal length stuff to it. I'm just going to put in the same settings as before, so 50 focal length, 0.8 aspect ratio, and I'm also going to enable the look at, act at a track, and then choose the lid. You'll see the rail is what this spline is, so we just hid the visualizer for it. I'm just going to drag it a bit closer, kind of similar to where our first camera setup was. Also, I just got to disable my depth of field again. Cool. So the goal of this is, I'm just going to hide the old camera, is we want to kind of create, oh, I don't know why I'm pointing. We want to create this arc that moves around our lid so that we have a smooth motion going around. This also means it's easy to make smoother paths with the rig rail because you're creating the path with a spline. So that might help with your specific animation that you're working on. It's going to go back to unlit mode. And then what we're going to do is, I'm happy with this starting point. I'm then going to click the rail and then click this point again to drag the second point. So I think I'm just going to first drag the entire rail a little lower, somewhere there, yep. And then click our spline point, somewhere there should be okay, towards the middle. and then Alt and drag to make a new point. And this is kind of the basics of how you make a spline. And then I'm just going to adjust the tangents. So something like that as well. You can also fine tune it with values here on the left if you're super particular about it. And then I'm going to maybe drag it somewhere there, drag this guy up, and then also make this wider. And to preview this path, if you select your camera rig rail, this absolute position on rail is what we'll be keyframing, and you can kind of see how this works now. And I've realized my third point is a little too close, so I might just drag it out somewhere there a little higher. This is what the middle point currently looks like, so I'm gonna just drag it around a little more, move it a little out, and then also move it a little up. Maybe something like that. So now you can see this is the spline path of our camera. So now we just want to drag our rig rail into sequencer, and I'm just going to set the position back to 1, which is our first point, press this keyframe property, and then go to frame 30, set this to 2, and then press enter, and that'll set a keyframe, and then go to frame 60, press 3, and that'll set a new keyframe. You'll notice I'm not in my motion design mode, and for some reason in the motion design mode, you cannot apply those key presets to non-transform keyframes, which is super annoying. I have no idea why. I hope they add that in the next update where you can kind of apply those presets to any type of value, because that would be super useful, but I'll just show you kind of how to set that up manually here anyways. Plus it's good to know how to do it. So let's just check this out. Oh, it's a little jittery, so I might just figure out what's going on. All right, so I just did some live troubleshooting, and as you can see with that camera S1B that we made, it has this weird jittering because the look at settings is fighting some sort of logic in the camera rig rail. I'm not sure what's happening, but an easy fix luckily is I'm just gonna drag the S1B out. I just went up to the menu, plus menu, and created a new Cine Camera actor, and then this guy here, and then I'm just going to drag it onto the existing rail that we made and set up the same exact settings with the target, and it seems to be working fine. Let me just double check again. So Cine Camera actor, and yeah, no jitter for some reason. So I don't know what was bugged with that other camera, but if that does happen to you, just create a new fresh camera and drag that onto your rail, and we'll use this guy instead. So I'm just going to delete the old dude and delete him from the sequencer, hit save, and just bind our camera. So that's our new camera that we just made. Cool. And I've got the keyframe still there and everything. So if we now look at this motion, it's similar to how we originally started with our first sequence. So if I go to the curve editor and then select Cine Camera Rail, you'll notice it's a smooth curve. So we're just going to adjust this manually for us. So we kind of want it to speed up here into the middle point, slow down a bit, and then slowly speed up to the end. So to do that, first I'm just going to select all of our keyframes and then change it to this weighted tangents mode, and then also this cube interpolation or broken tangents. Actually, sorry, for the middle one, I'm just going to select him. We can leave him on flat tangents. So the end keyframes are on these settings, and then the middle keyframe is on this setting. So the first thing we'll do is select our first keyframe, and I'm just going to hold shift and drag to sort of crank the curve a little more. And then I'm going to grab the top and then crank that guy in a little more. And with this middle keyframe, I'm going to flatten him out so the camera slows down a bit, and then also drag him out a little bit to something like that. And now let's check this out. So fast, slow, fast, fast, slow, fast, fast, slow, fast. So it's a good movement, but I don't think we're holding on the middle frame long enough. So we just need this flatter portion to kind of last a bit longer. So drag it out a bit wider, and then I'm also going to slowly tilt it a little bit down. Boom, boom. And yeah, that's it. You've got full control over these custom curves. You don't need to worry about rotation and transform and anything like that. You can just play with these curves, because we are just adjusting the position on the rail. So I really love this method, and this is pretty much the main two ways I work with motion and like velocity, speed cuts and things like that. If you're interested in other tips and tricks, I have a weekly newsletter where I show you really good tutorials that I've found, tips in Unreal Engine, useful summaries, cool movies, cool references. So if you're interested, link below, sign up, it's free and I will not spam you. Okay, so I've just set up this second camera shot, and you can see if I select the first keyframe, I've just done a similar thing and adjusted the curve, and in the middle keyframe, I've also adjusted the curve very slightly. Now, how do we combine these two things to make sure the motion looks right? So I'm just gonna save this second shot, and I'm gonna make a fresh sequence called LS for level sequence master. So we're gonna make a master sequence, and I'm just gonna double click that to open it, drag it out, and what we're going to do is first we'll add a camera cut track so that our renderer renders correctly, and then we'll also add a subsequence track. And then what we can do now is drag in our S1 and then drag in our S2. And now I'm just going to drag it back down and dock it here. And what I'm also going to do is just drag this down like this. So now what we can do is kind of view this and then see where we can match the timing. So I would say it's like as we're sweeping out around here is when we'll want to make the cut. So I'm just going to drag the sequence back and then drag this guy in. And then we also want to cut in as the motion, the initial camera motion hits. So like around just before that, maybe around there, and then drag it here, do this, and let's see how that looks. So not bad. I think we come in a little early, so I'm just going to drag this guy out a few frames, come in here. Okay, no, maybe go back one. I'm just control scrolling to zoom in. Maybe go to there. And I might start this one a little earlier, maybe a couple frames. Okay, let's view the whole thing. Yeah, and then we'd make a second cut there. I think that's looking all right. Yeah, I don't mind that. And then what you could do is, if you want to have a bit of fun, is maybe put the out point there with the right square bracket. And because we're on looping, so we kind of have a looping animation. It could be cleaned up a little bit, but now you guys kind of get the sense of how this works. And the next thing we'll do is quickly just set up some lighting. I'm going to go back into my shot one, and obviously I have a bunch of lights set up here for a different render, but let's say you want to still keep those lights but have your own unique lighting setup for this shot. So I'm just going to first pilot my camera in this left viewport, and then the next thing I'm going to do is actually just select all my lights and then drag it into the sequence track. Make a bit more room, drag it up, right click, move to a new folder. And what we'll also do is select all of them and do the plus button, and then also do an actor hidden in game. So that means only in this sequence, we can turn off the visibility on all of our lights. There we go. So now we have a fresh scene or a fresh sequence with all our lights hidden. And then I normally call this folder hide. And now what we can do is drag in a rectangular light, which is way too bright. What we can do is drag this into our sequence, right click, and then convert to spawnable. So now this rectangular light only lives inside this sequence, and then we don't need to worry about messing up all our other shots. So I'm just going to drag the rectangular light up and then maybe get a sort of lighting scenario that works well for me. And then what I can do is go here, Control D to duplicate it, drag another light, do something like that. And then again, when you duplicate it, you're gonna have to drag that into your sequence track, right click, convert to spawnable. And then what you can do is now animate these lights to match the movement of your camera. So on this first keyframe, I might leave my light in this position, put a plus in the transform. When I get to this shot, maybe I want my light to move there. I don't think I would like that, but we could do that. And then as we sweep out, I want the light to maybe hit the back somewhere there and then hit plus. And then what we can do is, because these are transform keyframes, is we can just use one of the presets. So just do exponential. We don't need to worry about fine tuning the keyframes, but you can if you want to. I'm just not going to for this one. There you go. So now you can keyframe both light movements, and now you've got your lights reacting to your camera movement. And then you just would do that with all your other subsequent shots. And once you've made all your different shots, you can stagger them in your master sequence like this, and then kind of just make a full nice little motion cut together that uses speed and velocity and also has some intentional lighting. Some of you might be interested in this shot here where the text kind of gets highlighted with the lights moving. It's honestly very simple. If I just come out of my camera here and I go to lit mode, because I've got like a normal map and I'm also displacing it with my nanite, if I go to triangles, you can see here the text is actually indented. I've just got two lights, one here and then one here, that are just sort of rimming the edges of the text to give that cool outline look. So definitely something really cool. And you can see how the lights are moving here in the right viewport. Really simple, nothing much to it. And again, using the simple motion design ease in and ease out keyframes for the camera. One thing I want to mention is, because we have a lot of fast moving camera, or if you have a scene with a lot of motion and fast motion, make sure you're using temporal samples, because that's kind of what contributes towards good motion blur and it looks nice and smooth without too much noise. By the way, I've sent an email out about this and sample settings in my newsletter, so sign up below if you're interested. Another thing to check is in your post-process volume, if you type in motion blur, you can then sort of play with the amount of motion blur that you want in your scene. So by default, I'm pretty sure it's on 0.5, yep, but you can try 0.2, 0.7. I've had to play with this before where I've had to reduce it to more of like a 0.2, 0.3 because the motion blur was a little too strong, so definitely play with it. And then finally, in your console variables, make sure you have your motion blur quality set to 4 before rendering so that you have nice smooth motion blur. Hopefully that was useful. I know there's not a lot of tutorials out there on this type of motion design stuff in Unreal, especially when it comes to product renders, so let me know if you want more of this stuff in the comments below. Like and subscribe if it was helpful, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.